What if the man living next door wasn't who he claimed to be? What if his entire life was a lie? And what if the only person who knew the truth ended up dead at the bottom of the ocean? Today, we are uncovering the chilling story of Albert Walker. The ocean was silent, not calm, silent. The kind of silence that makes experienced fishermen uneasy. At exactly 5 a.m., on a cold summer morning in 1996, two fishermen left the harbor of Brixham, Devon, expecting nothing more than another routine day at sea. The sky was grey. A thick blanket of fog hung over the water. And somewhere beneath those dark waves, a killer's secret was waiting to be discovered. Their first catch was disappointing. Almost nothing. So they decided to head farther out, 6 miles from shore, to a place locals call the Roughs, a stretch of ocean rarely visited by fishing boats. The men dropped their nets into the dark water and waited. An hour later, they began hauling them back in. Fish spilled across the deck, seaweed, debris. Then suddenly, the net jerked violently. Something heavy was caught inside, far heavier than any fish. As the tangled net slammed onto the deck, both fishermen froze. A human body rolled out. The man was pale, motionless. His eyes stared blankly toward the sky. For a moment, nobody spoke. Silent. Then one of the fishermen grabbed the radio. "Coast Guard, we found a body." Neither man realized it then, but they had just stumbled into one of Britain's most bizarre murder mysteries, a mystery involving stolen identities, millions of dollars, an international fugitive, and a killer who fooled almost everyone he met. At first glance, detectives believed they were investigating an accidental drowning. The body carried no identification, no wallet, no documents, nothing. Whoever this man was, his pockets had been emptied, almost as if someone had searched him before he entered the water. But one thing remained, a Rolex watch. It sat quietly on his wrist, a small detail, one that would eventually destroy a murderer. The body itself raised questions. It was remarkably well preserved, too well preserved, which suggested one thing. The victim hadn't been in the sea very long. Then the autopsy revealed something even more troubling. A deep wound to the head, strange injuries on the legs, and an unusual tattoo, a faded maple leaf on the back of his hand. Still, no name, no missing persons report, no obvious explanation. The investigation was going nowhere until a detective made a phone call. Black Ron, the Rolex watch had a serial number, and that number led detectives to a service record, a record that pointed to a man named Ronald Joseph Platt. Finally, the dead man had a name, or so they thought. Detectives traced Ronald's last known address to Essex. There, they contacted someone listed as his close friend and personal reference, a wealthy businessman named David Davis. When officers spoke to Davis, he appeared helpful, calm, confident, almost too confident. He explained that Ronald had moved abroad. He even identified the maple leaf tattoo immediately. Immediately. "It's Canadian," he told them. Then he mailed investigators a photograph of Ronald. Everything seemed straightforward. A tragic accident. Case closed. But fate had other plans. Because one detective made a mistake, and that mistake changed everything. 6. Detective Sergeant Peter Edmund drove to a quiet village in Essex. His job was simple: deliver a message to David Davis. Nothing more. The village was tiny. Just a few houses. Redman arrived and knocked on a door. The wrong door. 4. An elderly couple answered. The detective asked if David Davis lived next door. The couple looked puzzled. Then, one of them said something that sent a chill down his spine. No, David Davis doesn't live there. That's Ronald Platt. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The detective's mind raced, because Ronald Platt was supposed to be dead. His body had already been pulled from the sea. So who exactly was living next door? And if Ronald was alive, then whose body had been found in the fishing net? That single conversation transformed the entire investigation. This was no accident. Someone was lying. And someone was very dangerous. As detectives dug deeper, the disturbing picture began to emerge. David Davis wasn't who he claimed to be. In fact, nothing about him was real. Years earlier, he had walked into an auction house in Yorkshire. There he met a receptionist named Elaine Boyce. He was charming, intelligent, confident. The kind of man who could make strangers trust him within minutes. He offered Elaine a job. Soon afterward, he befriended her boyfriend, Ronald Platt, a gentle, quiet man who saw the best in people. Fisi, the exact kind of person a predator looks for. Within months, Davis had inserted himself into their lives. Business ventures, travel plans, church gatherings, promises of wealth and success. He became family. Then came the gift. 2 airline tickets to Canada. It seemed generous, life-changing, a dream come true. But it wasn't generosity. It was preparation. Because David Davis had already chosen Ronald Platt for something far more sinister. His identity. While Ronald was living in Canada, David Davis disappeared. And when he resurfaced, he was calling himself Ronald Platt. For years, nobody questioned it. Neighbors accepted him. Friends trusted him. Local churches welcomed him. He married, raised children, played tennis, built an entirely new life, all under a stolen name. But then disaster struck. The real Ronald Platt returned from Canada. Suddenly, there were 2 men with the same identity, and one of them had everything to lose. Because the man known as David Davis wasn't just a liar. His real name was Albert Walker, an international fugitive wanted in Canada. A man accused of stealing millions of dollars before vanishing without a trace. If Ronald exposed him, everything would collapse. The fake identity, the money, the freedom, everything. And according to prosecutors, Albert Walker decided there was only one solution: murder. One day, Walker invited Ronald onto his yacht, the Lady Jane. Just 2 old friends spending time together. At least that's what Ronald believed. But investigators think Walker had planned every detail. Out at sea, far from witnesses, far from help, Ronald Platt trusted the wrong man for the last time. Somewhere on the open water, prosecutors believe Walker struck him, attached an anchor to his body, and dropped him into the sea. Then he sailed home, believing the ocean would bury truth forever. But the ocean gave Ronald back, and once it did, Albert Walker's carefully constructed world began to collapse, piece by piece, lie by lie, until there was nowhere left to hide. In court, Albert Walker remained calm, even charming. He admitted he had used fake identities, but he denied murder. The jury listened. They examined the evidence: the Rolex, the anchor, the blood found on the yacht, the lies, the deception, the motive. Then they retired to deliberate. Just 2 hours later, they returned, guilty. Albert Walker was sentenced to life imprisonment. The man who had spent years fooling everyone had finally failed. And perhaps the most frightening part of this story isn't the murder. It's the fact that so many people trusted him. Neighbors liked him. Friends admired him. Church members respected him. Nobody saw the monster hiding behind the smile, because Albert Walker didn't look like a killer. He looked like someone you'd happily invite into your home. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous.